Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What was your wait a damn minute moment that saved your life? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Like in the famous Reddit story about the guy who had carbon monoxide poisoning and didn't know it, well, I had that. And long before Reddit, so there wasn't some heads up. I lived in my parents' basement beside a furnace, and some part of that was leaking the gas and no one knew. Luckily at the time I was living at uni and only home on weekends and usually not there, and when I was, it wasn't the cold of winter yet, so my window was usually open. But I started experiencing what I thought was maybe a ghost. Things seemed to change locations in the room without me doing it. TV would suddenly be on sometimes. One time the shower was on all by itself, but no one was home. It got increasingly more disturbing. But then one day, my girlfriend phoned and asked if I was coming soon to pick her up, and I responded with, "Sure, I can leave a bit early. I do want to finish my food for..." Then looked at my plate. I'd eaten almost everything on it. Then looked at the clock, and I think it was a couple of hours unaccounted for. That's when I clued in was all real, investigated, and we figured out about the leak. Saw a coworker smoking. I did a double take and my supervisor saw me, looked to him, and snatched it out of his mouth. We were standing inside of a grain silo at the time. Did you know that grain dust is explosive? I walk into my room and it smelled like gas, and I remembered my mom left the stove burner on for an hour just 4 hours prior to that. I was sitting there trying to decide what to do when I started feeling really drowsy and a little nauseous. I realized I had to leave quickly when I was getting confused about what was going on. That could have ended very poorly for you. Luckily, you saw the signs and got out of there safely. Glad to hear it. I was 9 or 10 with my sister, 5 or 6 home alone during February vacation, like barely old enough to be home alone. Some guy pulls into our driveway, knocks on our door. I open the real door, but covered lock the storm door with its cheesy little lock. Guy says he's there as a home inspector and pulls out a laminated ID that reads Home Inspector from his wallet. But underneath that was another fake ID that read Electrical Inspector or some such. I thought it over, looked at his car. It had license plates and I figured criminals wouldn't have license plates, but yet, stranger danger. I politely declined, closed the real door and locked it, and he drove off. I'll add that to my house was only on the block with young kids, and it was one of a few weeks when we'd have been home alone without my working mom, so there was some pre-planning going on. Here's a long but worth it one. My wife and I were traveling to Saudi Arabia from Jordan with our 2-month-old son, 60 kilometers before the border and over 30 away from any populated areas. We had a flat tire. It was 11 before midnight. I had spent 3 years working in that area before, and I know it's filled with hyenas and wolves. I start changing the tire, and I put all the lights on. I give my wife both my and her phone and tell her to shine on the sides of the road. Everyone knows how to change a flat tire blindfolded. After attempting to shine the light for me multiple times, I got mad. Shine it toward the side. I never told her that, but I was afraid of what might come from the wilderness. A few minutes later, she runs to me calling my name that it is moving. I was about to finish working, but I just said to myself, go check. 1 minute won't bother you. After checking, it was a motorcycle-sized hyena that could have had us both for dinner. Was a residential construction worker. The other laborer was setting up scaffolding. I protested that I would not work under this particularly worn and cracked board. It would usually be stocked with 15 to 32 pound blocks 6 feet up. The owner got up on the board screaming at me, calling me all kinds of pleasantries while jumping on the board. It cracked, and he fell 6 feet down. The 2 ends of the board came together, smacking off his head. The block up there, plus mortar, would have been more than double his weight. He shook it off. I was genuinely frightened of him afterwards, knowing I could not deliver that kind of a blow, and said, get a new plank. TL, DR. Boss wanted me to use shoddy support material that would have dropped over 450 pounds on me. A man came down round the back of my house covered in blood. I was in my garden, saying he'd had a car accident and could he use my phone to call his wife. I offered to call an ambulance and he refused, saying it would affect his insurance and he had just hit a tree. I then noticed he had fingernail scratches on his neck and arms. I told my daughter to go in the house and get my phone out of my bedroom. I told him to sit on my chair in my brick shed as he could be in shock. Once he sat down, I slammed the door, locked it, ran in my house, grabbed my children, went to my neighbor's house where I rang the police. Turned out he'd raped and stabbed an elderly woman a few streets away. A father leaves his 5-year-old child alone in a pool. Yeah, that's a big mistake. I think it's a little bit more than that, but that's just me. Once, when I was like 5, my dad has left me alone in a pool. Big mistake, considering I didn't know how to swim at that. And 2 minutes later, I was fighting for my life. But at some point, a bit of time later, I just said, how about using my legs and arms to save myself? And guess what? That's how I learned how to swim. My buddy asked me to come with him on a drug deal, but the house he was going to was shady. So I said no, and told him not to go. He said he wouldn't. 2 days later, I found out he was murdered by 4 cowards when he went inside. They put him under a futon, and when people came in, they asked if they wanted to see a dead body. They made a joke out of him. I know drug dealers aren't the greatest people by any means, but he has 2 kids that loved him. I put some eggs on to boil, gas hob, for my sandwiches the next day. I forgot and went to bed. In the morning I went downstairs, went into the kitchen, and there are the remnants of boiled eggs which had exploded all over the kitchen. The pan must gave boiled dry, and gas hob wasn't all right. It must have blown itself out when the eggs went off. I light a cigarette as I survey the immense cleanup I'm facing. I can hear a hissing noise and thought the gas is not lit. I realize it is still turned on, so go and turn it off. That's when I realized I had just been lucky. I was walking through the woods, and I was about to climb over an old log that was on the ground laying against a big cedar tree. The other side of the tree had a few foot drop on the other side. As I was about to go over, I noticed a very sharp, broken-off foot-long branch on the cedar. It was about hip level as I was scooting over the log. I had a second thought, thinking that could be dangerous for someone else walking through the woods. I literally stopped, looked back at it, and thought about it for a few seconds, and then I broke it. Later on that day, I came back through that same spot and climbed up over that log. My foot slipped, bringing my entire chest down hard onto where that sharp point had been. I remember it being very close to my heart, and in disbelief that I fell on that exact spot. It was 15 years ago, and I still remember that like it was yesterday. Was walking down the street with my boyfriend holding hands as a couple usually does. As we're walking, 2 rough-looking men approach us in a less than friendly manner. I think it's worth mentioning that this took place in Jamaica, where, if you didn't know, they don't really like the homos. They begin questioning us, asking us if we're gay and stuff, eventually begging to yell slurs at us. Me and my boyfriend run straight down the street without looking back. Fast forward a couple of weeks forward. I'm walking from a bar by myself, half dazed. A man crosses the street to my side and gets behind me. Naturally, I look back to see the person's face. Cause what the F was that for? After glimpsing back and forth at the dude for a few minutes, I come to a realization that this man's face was familiar. Not just familiar, his face had a bitter tone of rage to it, as if his expression was saying, "I'm about to beat the shit out of you, punk." I automatically dash out of the sidewalk and into a nearby parking lot, hearing a gunshot go off behind me not even 2 seconds later. If I'm being completely honest, I don't even know if the shots were directed at me, but I know for a fact that if I had stayed on the street any longer, I'd probably had a black eye. Proxy story from my mom. My brother and college friends were visiting and all just turned 21. They went to a bar one night and my parents were asleep when they got home. For some unknown reason, my mom woke up suddenly at 3 a.m. and decided to get up and looked out the window. She said there was no noise that woke her up, she just got a mom feeling. She looked out only to see 2 guys in the hot tub. She decided to get a better look and go outside, only to find them both passed out. One was leaning back out of the tub on the pavement and the other head first in the water. She immediately grabbed his head and he gasped for air. He must have just went down. The other guy woke up and got out. My brother was asleep in his room and had no idea they were out there, but they all got drunk at the bar earlier. For years, every time they visited our house, they would profusely thank my mom for saving their life. Let me set up the scene here first. My dad owns this property, 5 to 7 acres I believe, which had 2 ponds on it. One was small and the other was quite large. In the open parts of the property, where no machines or buildings were stationed, in the corner, bordered by the ponds and the property line, was a ton of rock. It was mostly dirt at the base, and there was a lot of calish rock on the top. Calish is quite easy to break, and in our case, some of the larger ones had fossilized shells inside of them. So me and my sister, I was 11, she was 7, I would go out there after school with our hammers and look for fossils. We had a whole little system going. It was quite fun. This takes place around 2 years ago, early sunset. The sky is just starting to turn a hue of yellow. Me and my sister were out there playing as usual when I hear this, like, stomping and cracking sound. It's kind of difficult to describe. Anyway, I was a paranoid person, so I stand up and look toward the larger pond where the sound seems to be coming from, and I don't see anything. I walk over to where we kept our little tools, grabbed a hammer, told my sister to stay where she was, and crept toward the sound. It got louder as I got nearer. Adrenaline was starting to pump at this point, and I tied my hair up, though I was thinking I was getting worked up for nothing. I get down to hide behind a large mound of dirt and rock, make sure I have a grip on my hammer, and peek over the mound. There's a very deranged man standing by the pond. He looked as if he hadn't washed or changed in at least 2 months. He was also holding a crowbar or something, and was ankle deep in the mud. Of course I got scared. I get down again, and I start thinking about what on earth I should do. I decided it would probably be better to just get inside safely and lock ourselves in. My father was meeting up with a customer elsewhere. I creep as quietly as possible toward where my sister was, and I warned her that we needed to get inside now. She asked why, and I turned to look back at where the man was to make sure he hadn't noticed me. He did. He was walking toward us. I screamed at my sister to drop her crap and run. We sprinted as fast as our legs could manage. We were kicking up dust, trying to get into our trailer house as fast as we could. I didn't look back. When my sister looked to see if he had given chase, I literally grabbed her by the hair and hauled her into the house and locked the door. I don't know where the man went. He vanished. He may not have even meant any harm. But I was a paranoid and overprotective sibling, and for that, I may have saved us from something worse. Needless to say, we didn't go out there for a while after. TLDR. Protective sibling causes me and my sister to flee from bald zombie man with a crowbar. Some people might say that 16 and 20 isn't that big of a deal. Call me old-fashioned, but it's a big deal, and he turned out to be a loser after all. Not me, but the neighbors. I was 16 and boyfriend was 20. Yes, I know. Anyway, we were outside fighting at 10 p.m. Heard a whoosh sound. He said it was the wind. I was like, shh, let me listen. The neighbor's chimney did that thing where all the buildup inside it ignites. We were in the country, and I saw flames across the pasture on their roof. Told boyfriend to call 911. Ran upstairs, woke up mom. Back downstairs, he hadn't moved. I called 911, and we drove over. I ran inside the house, and he waited outside. Mom came in and helped get everyone out. Then firefighters arrived, and my boyfriend took half the credit. Still salty about it today, but at least everyone lived. Haven't thought about that in years. Thanks for the chance to tell it. Yes, I broke up with him after that. Still friends with the neighbors, 30 years later. This is a little different. The wait a damn minute almost cost me my life. My parents' house comes with a shotgun kitchen. Heard the term from an architecture student. It means the kitchen is just one long, narrow hall that leads to the garage where my dad spends a lot of time for various reasons. I walked through the kitchen to see him, and only the deepest part of my subconscious registered that a glass tray was sitting right on the stove burner, and the burner was on. And as I'm talking to my dad, this revelation comes to the surface, and I'm like, shit! And I run to turn off the stove. But halfway between the garage and the stove, the tray exploded into hundreds of pieces of glass shrapnel. Had my instincts been 1 second quicker, that would have gone badly for me. But as it went, I was uninjured save for neurotically freaking out every time my wife leaves something that isn't a pot or pan on the stove, which she does several times a week. When I was 10, the fam and I was moving states, Australia, and we were going to drive to our new home, which is across 3 states. We had driven from our state and past 2 states, and were going to make the long journey to the 3rd and final, which would be our new home. We all woke up at the ass crack of dawn and got in the car to go fuel up before leaving. It was still dark outside, and we wanted to get moving quickly to cover more distance, so we went to the closest servo to fill up the tank. Dad is rushing, and after filling up the tank, we head out and set the GPS to get us out of town and on the highway to begin our 16-hour drive. Not even 5 minutes of us being in the car, and Dad says, "Wait, everyone be quiet." So we sat there in confused silence while Dad processes his thoughts. He then goes, "Something is wrong with the car. It feels wrong." He chucks a U-turn, and we're all confused and complaining because the town was a bit weird to say the least. Next thing we know, we're back at the servo, where he got the fuel from, and he gets out of the car and goes to pump. He comes back with a look of relieved panic. Mom asks what's wrong, and he says, "I put the wrong fuel in. These are diesel pumps. Our car takes unleaded." We had to get dropped off in the middle of the town while Dad takes the car to get it drained and cleaned. And we ended up back on the road before lunch, but lost 6 hours of driving time, which was well worth it, as the next town was about 600 kilometers away. And we would have got stuck somewhere in the middle of the outback Australia in summertime, which means hot, 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 in a different state where we knew no one and didn't have the resources to contact help.